Well, Manchester United are on their 6th permanent manager with the appointment of Ruben Amorim since Sir Alex Ferguson retired in 2013. So it lends itself to the question, Rob. England was once described as the impossible job. I think Gareth Southgate has proved it's possible without quite getting England over the line. So is Manchester United the new impossible job?
I think some fans are probably looking at it as the impossible job. Obviously, since Sir Alex Ferguson, they've gone through every different type of manager. David Moyes was the Premier League proven mini Ferguson. Then you bring in the proven winner, the experienced coach in Van Gaal. That didn't work. Then you bring in the guy who's guaranteed trophies, Jose Mourinho. Won trophies but didn't win the Premier League. Then you bring in the kind of the club legend, put smiles back on people's faces, play the United Way guy in Solskjaer. That didn't work. And then you pick the up-and-coming best coach in Europe, Erik ten Hag, and that didn't work. And so a lot of United fans are looking at this and thinking, well, you've tried everything. That United is such a big club, the expectation is so high, the pressure, the scrutiny is unlike anywhere else in the world, probably bar Real Madrid. Is there anyone who can take this job and recreate even a portion of what Ferguson achieved?
It's not the impossible job anymore, though. I think it has been for the last 10 years because of the state of the club and the kind of the structure of the club. But I think the beauty of that Ruben Amorim has is that he's working for a club now that has at least, it's a new structure in place, but it's a football structure. You've got a sporting director, a technical director. You've got people who basically know what they're doing. Now, post Sir Alex Ferguson, we all know that United lurks from one managerial disaster to another. I mean, you went through the list of names there. David Moyes was supposedly the chosen one, but he wasn't. He was like 6th or 7th choice. People at the club will now tell you that he was after Carlo Ancelotti, he was after Diego Simeone, Jurgen Klopp, Jose Mourinho. Lots of different coaches turned United down for different reasons. Moyes didn't work. Then Van Gaal, it was a big name at the time, but he was well past his best. He hadn't managed in the club game for 4 years, but the point I'm making is that the people who were making those decisions didn't know football. Ed Woodward and the Glazers did not have a clue what they were doing because they just went on the reputation or the advice of agents. Jose Mourinho was a reaction to Man City hiring Pep Guardiola. They didn't look at what he did in terms of what he'd become. 10 years earlier at Chelsea, he was the guy. But by the time he arrived at United in 2016, he wasn't. And again, the lack of due diligence in all these coaches, the lack of scrutiny. You could talk about Solskjaer. That was just ridiculous in the sense that Ed Woodward caved into the popular demand and Rio Ferdinand saying Ollie at the wheel. And then you had Erik ten Hag. I disagree on ten Hag. He wasn't the up-and-coming coach. He was a cheap option in the sense that Mauricio Pochettino and he were the final two. Pochettino was still under contract at PSG at the time. It would have cost a lot more money to get out of PSG. He wanted to bring his coaches with him. It was easy to hire ten Hag, who was actually older than David Moyes when he took the job at Man United, so he wasn't the young up-and-coming coach. So anyway, we get forward to now. Ruben Amorim comes in. Yes, the squad's a mess. Yes, United are miles behind Liverpool and Man City. But at least the building blocks are now in place for him to be successful because you've got people above him who know what they're doing or have a track record to show that they've actually got experience in doing what they are paid to do.
The comparison is Arsenal for me because obviously Arsene Wenger and Sir Alex Ferguson were the two dominant managers of the Premier League that of their era. And Arsenal went through this in a very different way. They clipped the wings of Arsene Wenger in the final kind of year, 18 months of his tenure. They started to make the kind of appointments, Ogden, that you're talking about in that, they made 9 new department heads. They created this kind of football structure that was supposed to have a head coach slot into it rather than having the whole club shaped in the image of one man. Now, the irony, of course, is that Arsenal had that structure in 2018. They then appointed Unai Emery to fit within it. Ivan Gazidis, who at the time was the chief executive, left to go to AC Milan, and then there was kind of a bit of a power grab going on above Unai Emery, and Emery got sort of lost in all of that, and the club didn't really have its identity. It lost its way, and they ended up sacking Emery and bringing in Arteta, who was started as a head coach, but has ended up over the last 5 years. He was officially promoted to manager, and then the system that they've put in place around him, and I know we're going to talk about it later with Edu's departure, but they have a technical director, they've got a couple of key board members, they've got the academy director set up, and then they've got this sort of 3-man structure on the football side that then sits beneath the board level and then ultimately up to the cronkies in terms of how they make decisions. And it started to work obviously pretty well. And within that, Arteta's kind of grown and kind of earned the authority. But is the problem not at United that they've just, with the succession of managers, they've just expected the manager to fill the void left by Fergie on his own.
Yeah.
And some managers have strengths in that area, and some managers have weaknesses in other areas. And so there are gaps created. And where those gaps have existed, there's not been the football expertise to either fill them or shape, the areas in which they need to improve.
Every time they'll basically say it's different now. We've got a structure in place. We've ripped up the scouting system. We've ripped up the youth academy system. And what was I remember being in a boardroom at Old Trafford with Ed Woodward, and this would have been, I think this was when Solskjaer was given the job permanently. So it's 6 months after he came in, and we're all sat there in this boardroom. And what would this have been? What year was it? 2018? I can't remember that long ago. And Ed came up with the phrase, cultural reset.
Yeah.
And now we're not 6 years later. These cultural resets and these cultural reviews and these let's get him back to the Man United DNA, these buzz phrases kept coming and nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happened. I remember that conversation as well, but we're going to hire a technical director. And again, that drifted and drifted because nobody really wanted the job because they wanted, I was told that the key candidates wanted to report directly to the Glazers, but they had to go through Ed. Yeah. And the problem with that is when that happens, that if you report to the chief exec rather than the boss, the chief exec can filter what he wants the boss to hear. Yeah. And that was the problem. And, when John Murtough was appointed as football director, it was basically because Ed wanted to fill the role. And I don't think John Murtough was ever allowed to do the job without his hands tied behind his back.
People at United are certainly conscious of that kind of every time this happens. They go, this is the way that, this is how we're going to win. This is the fresh start, the new era. And they have tried to play it down a little bit this time in that they are well aware that this is going to be a massive step up for Amorim. He's quite similar to Ten Hag in a sense that they've both been successful at what you would consider to be lesser European leagues and are now making a step up into what is the most competitive domestic league in the world. So United have been cautious about sort of saying, look, this is our new messiah, we've struck gold kind of thing, that they're not going down that route this time. There is, though, a feeling that there is an element of a fresh start for the reasons that you've just said, in that you mentioned there, James, before about Fergie was appointed in 1986 and the club and football just grew around him. And when you lift out that guy, the whole thing just collapses. And they spent so many years trying to recreate his influence and just couldn't do it. And over the last 10 years, they've tried behind the scenes to change the structure and to kind of fill in the gaps that have been left by Ferguson without much success. Now that they feel that they have got the right structure with Dan Ashworth and Jason Wilcox and Omar Barada, and that the head coach, Amorim, is the first Man United head coach rather than manager. It's quite pointed that he was given that title. He's not manager. He's going to be the guy that coaches the team and picks the tactics and chooses the team for a Saturday. That they have got the foundations there to kind of move forward in a way that they haven't been in the past.
And they finally believe that they have to do that because it feels as though there's been a sort of nostalgia around United that they'll find the guy, they'll find the messiah. This guy exists. He is out there. There is a manager.
Choice. I mean, you talked about Ed went. So when Ed was appointing, I think it was either Mourinho or Solskjaer, he knew that they had massive problems post Ferguson with the structure, and he went round every major club in Europe and he asked their president or CEO and said, if the whole club is 100%, what influence does a manager have? If Ferguson was 100%, he had 100% influence, and he went round and he said that we got varying answers from about 30 to 40%. He said Real Madrid were the one that said 10%. Like everything else is our influence. The manager has 10% influence, and he decided then that he wasn't going to go down that Real Madrid route, that he wanted his manager to have an influence around about 50%. So basically half of a Ferguson. So the manager would still be the main guy at Carrington. And that's why he ended up pointing Van Gaal, Solskjaer, Mourinho, Ten Hag to a certain extent, the main guy. And that will be the biggest change now with Amorim, is that he won't be the most important guy at Carrington. It will be Ashworth and Wilcox and Barada.
See, what I was told about the regime post-Ferguson was that, Ed Woodward, Richard Arnold and the Glazers, that they didn't know what they didn't know. And what that means is that they thought they knew everything. They thought that their way is the right way because they didn't have the intelligence or the expertise from outside the club. Matt Judge is another guy. Woodward, Arnold, Matt Judge were all very much a close group of almost like college friends from Bristol University. Yeah. They had no experience of football beyond the commercial world. It was completely alien to the world that they came into. But one thing that is never really mentioned about United post-Ferguson is that the Glazers basically saw the club as, they still saw it as the cash cow. It's where they kind of make their money. That's still the case. We know that. But they went from under Ferguson being a team. To be fair, the last 3 or 4 years under Ferguson, they kind of drifted towards, focusing more on earning money than putting it into the team. I think there's a subtle change from Man United being a football club that was basically got up every day to win things, to being a football club that was designed to make money. Yeah. And when your priority is to make money, as the Glazers, was and is, then you're going to ignore the aspects that drive Man City and drive Liverpool and maybe to an extent drive Arsenal, that success comes first. For the ambitious owners want success. Man United's owners and the executives they appointed to run the club wanted financial reward. Remember that great quote that Ed Woodward came out with in a conference call? It doesn't matter how on-field success does not dictate how much money Man United make. I mean, that sums up Man United in the last 10 years perfectly. And that is gone now. They are a football club again.
The added thing on top of this, and I spoke to a few coaches who have worked at Man United over the last sort of 10 years, and a lot of them were talking about the specific sort of pressures of playing, of coaching, of managing Man United. Things like the pressure, the scrutiny, that Man United is always on the back pages. Regardless of the story, it's always Man United on the back page. That recruitment clearly has been poor for the last 10 years, but also you can do what you think is a great job. You get the guy that you think is going to transform the team. I'm thinking like Jadon Sancho, for example. Everyone thought, yeah, that seemed like it might work. Donny van der Beek, and come to Man United and just cannot, for some reason, cannot replicate what they've done elsewhere at Man United. And some of those coaches said that that there are things like things that you can't put into a column, like the weight of history or the weight of the Man United shirt. All these things that that these players and these coaches have got to deal with at Man United, that probably Real Madrid, possibly, and Bayern Munich are the only other clubs that you've got to deal with. And it does affect the success that United have had, because some people just cannot perform in that environment.
It's true that an agent of a Man United player who struggled at United, who was there quite a long time but he struggled, he said to me, what you got to remember at Man United is it's the heaviest shirt in world football. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you go through every 1 to 11 on them shirts and you can find number 1, Peter Schmeichel, number 2, Dennis Irwin, number 7, Brian Robson, Eric Cantona, David Beckham, number 9, Andy Cole. Every position, every shirt has got an incredible legend in that position that you're compared to. And it's a fair point. I mean, Liverpool is probably the closest, but I think even Liverpool can fall behind Man United in that sense. Man City don't have it, Arsenal don't have it, Chelsea don't have it, but if you've got a Man United, you are judged against the ghosts of the past. And a lot of players in recent years haven't been up to it, but that's not their fault. That's the fault of the people who recruited them and didn't realise that you need to have the skill set and the mentality. And I think the current squad is definitely lacking that mentality to play for a big club. And you can see that how they, high five when they clear a corner. It's like, is that what it's all about these days, clearing a corner? So they need to be a certain level of player, physically and mentally, to play for Man United, and that's drifted.
Playing style is another one. A lot of these coaches say that it's not, Man United is probably the only club in the world that it's not enough to win. If you win 1-0, it should have been 2. If you win 3-0, well, the team that you were playing weren't good enough, and it should have been 5-0 anyway. And actually, it doesn't matter if you win a trophy because you didn't win it playing the United way. I spoke to one of Van Gaal's coaches who said that they really struggled with that he thought that his football was the way to win with the players that he had, but then got all this criticism about the football was boring. And he said that they won an FA Cup, the first trophy since Ferguson, but he was still getting pelters for his football. It happened to Eric Ten Hag. Eric Ten Hag, whatever you want to say about him, won 2 trophies in 2 years, but at the end, people were still saying your style of football isn't good enough. So it's not enough to win trophies. It's not enough probably to win the Premier League. You've got to do it in a way that fans think is the United way, and it comes with an added pressure. Yeah,
the players couldn't stand playing for Van Gaal. There was a story towards the end. It's not an old story. I think we've heard this before, but Van Gaal was so controlling. He told his strikers not to shoot with the first touch. So he was telling Wayne Rooney, do not shoot with your first touch. Make sure you take a touch to control it and shoot. And obviously, a goal scorer, his instinct is to score with his first touch. And it was a player, one of Rooney's teammates told me this story. And he said there was a goal, I think they played Tottenham at the start of the season. I think it was an own goal. I think Kyle Walker scored an own goal. And it was because Rooney, rather than shoot first time, he took a touch and the ball bounced off Kyle Walker's shins and went into the net. But that was because of Van Gaal's instruction. I said, well, what happened if you took a shot with your first touch? He said, he would kill you in the dressing room. Unless you scored, he would absolutely...
Imagine the Rooney goals we'd never see, the volley against Newcastle and the overhead kick against Man City. That never would have happened.
But Van Gaal would also take the centre-half, he'd say, right, he would basically move them 6 inches on the training ground and said, I want you there. I remember his first press conference, Van Gaal. We're on a summer tour in Washington. He said, I want my players to play without intuition. And I went away thinking, did we hear that right? He must play with intuition. You be intuitive and you can play off the cuff. And we went back to the tape, and no, he didn't want intuition in his players. He wanted them to do exactly as he told them to do.
There's a great Ander Herrera story where they'd gone to Everton, a really tough place to go, and they'd won 3-0. And towards the end of the game, Herrera scores with his foot, like the ball comes across the box. his first touch, scores this really good goal, and the game finishes, he's down the tunnel at Goodison Park, and he sees Van Gaal at the door of the dressing room, and he's going, yes, like this, and he's ready for his big high five and the big pat on the back, and Van Gaal just goes, no, I told you not to shoot with your first touch. Yeah. And they've won 3-0 at Everton, and the whole mood of the dressing room just goes like this.
I mean, I know that Wayne Rooney and Michael Carrick went to see him once to basically say, look, you've got to just take your pressure off. It's too much. It's too suffocating. So, in terms of the impossible job, when a manager is that intense and that controlling, and Ten Hag was a little bit like that, not quite as oppressive as Van Gaal, but that is the problem that you've got. Man United are a club that is built on free spirits and talismanic players. When you've got a manager who's trying to coach the players to the nth degree like that, the players don't like it, the football becomes boring, the fans don't like it, the results deteriorate, and the atmosphere becomes terrible. And I think that's what we've seen too often.
So there is then an acceptance that they have to shift away from the idea that the manager is all-seeing, all-knowing, and can answer basically any question. I always, there's two stories, one about Arsene Wenger and one about Sir Alex Ferguson that spring to mind, about just the level of control that they had. That I remember when Fergie wanted to sign Stuart Pearce from Nottingham Forest, and Brian Clough wouldn't take his phone calls about him, so he drove to the City Ground and waited in the car park for Brian Clough to come out after training to go and speak to him about Stuart Pearce. Imagine a manager doing that now. It's this sort of antiquated notion of, a manager can solve all problems, can start a transfer and finish a transfer and sign the contract and go to the obviously they play a key role, but they're within a wider recruitment structure that all these top clubs have accepted that they had to have. And it feels like United have kind of finally accepted that they need to actually employ people to fulfill these positions. And the other one was about Arsene Wenger, was that if you wanted a new iPhone at the training ground, this is going back a long time now, you had to have that signed off by Arsene Wenger. The manager of the football club would sign off whether you could get a new phone if you worked at the training ground. That's the level of control that Arsene Wenger had at one point. Again, imagine that nowadays. You'd have so many people that you'd go to, a chain of command with a structure, an internal structure that should exist. And I think it feels, and you guys are a better placed than me to know, but it feels like there's an acceptance finally at United that there has to be a football structure, a clear identity, a vision given to that club that the manager or the head coach slots into. And if he becomes superbly successful, as and Arteta obviously won the FA Cup, he's taken Arsenal to the brink of winning the Premier League, and he's earned that extra authority. Is the idea then that Ruben Amorim comes in and accepts that he is a smaller part within that structure, but if he succeeds, he earns the autonomy, he earns the right to start making bigger decisions as time goes on?
I think that's a key thing, that you don't get given it on day one, that you earn it. And Pep Guardiola has earned that at City. Arteta's earned it at Arsenal, and their influence is massive now at those two clubs. If Amorim is massively successful, he will probably reach that level of influence, but he doesn't get given that on day one. It's to be earned rather than handed down.
And the task of earning that obviously begins in earnest for Ruben Amorim. Time will tell whether he can prove it is not the impossible job after all.